You're just another rogue nobody, Judge. My money decides truth, power, consequence, always. Your money ends here. Your mouth ends now. This courtroom will break you.
The courtroom didn't just feel cold. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room by a vacuum of pure, unadulterated hatred. On one side of the aisle sat Elena, a 19-year-old girl whose eyes were red from a week of crying, her hands trembling so violently that the papers in her lap rattled like dry leaves in a storm. She was wearing her server's uniform, a faded, polyester vest that represented 80 hours of work a week just to keep her mother's insulin in the refrigerator. Across from her sat the embodiment of untouched privilege, Mrs. Beatrice Sterling. Clad in a vintage silk wrap and dripping in diamonds that caught the fluorescent light like shards of ice, Mrs. Sterling wasn't just looking at Elena, she was looking through her, as if the girl were a stain on an otherwise perfect rug. But here is the secret that will keep you glued to your seat until the very last second of this video. Mrs. Sterling walked into this courtroom thinking she was the hunter, but she had no idea that she was about to become the prey. She believed that her husband's position on the city council and her family's multi-million-dollar real estate empire made her immune to the laws of man. What she didn't know, and what you are about to see, is that a single microscopic piece of technology was hidden in plain sight during her racist tirade at the restaurant. It's a piece of evidence so volatile that it didn't just win Elena the case. It triggered a chain reaction that would lead to the total collapse of the Sterling dynasty within 48 hours of this trial. This isn't just a legal proceeding, it is the most satisfying public execution of an ego ever captured on digital film. If you have ever been looked down upon by someone who thought their bank account gave them a license to be a monster, then you are exactly where you need to be. Before we witness the moment Judge Judy turns this socialite's world into a pile of ash, do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the justice you're about to see is so rare and so powerful that you'll want to tell your grandkids where you were when the untouchable Mrs. Sterling finally hit the floor. Comment "Justice" below if you're ready to see a bully get dismantled. The backstory of this collision is where the rage truly begins to simmer. Elena had been working at the Gilded Oak, an upscale bistro where the tips from a single night could mean the difference between paying rent and facing eviction. Mrs. Sterling was a platinum member, a woman who treated the staff like NPCs in a video game designed for her amusement. On the night in question, the kitchen had run out of a specific vintage of sparkling water. When Elena leaned in to quietly apologize and offer a premium substitute on the house, Mrs. Sterling didn't just decline. She snapped. It started with a comment about Elena's low-class accent, but it rapidly spiraled into a dark, vitriolic attack on Elena's heritage. The restaurant, filled with the city's elite, went deathly silent as Mrs. Sterling stood up, her face contorted in a mask of prehistoric bigotry, and screamed that people like Elena were the reason the country was rotting from the inside. She didn't stop at words. In an act of pure, calculated cruelty, she took a bowl of hot French onion soup and poured it slowly over Elena's head, telling her to wash off the smell of the gutter. The managers were too terrified of the Sterling name to intervene, but as Elena stood there, dripping and humiliated, a silent hero was watching. A busboy, a kid even younger than Elena, had just finished installing a high-fidelity ambient noise canceller for the restaurant's new acoustic system. It was active. It was recording. And every syllable of Mrs. Sterling's hate was being converted into a digital file that was about to be played in the most watched courtroom in America. As the trial opens, the tension is a physical weight. Judge Judy enters the room not with her usual brisk pace, but with a slow, deliberate walk that signals she has already read the preliminary filings and is disgusted by what she's seen. Mrs. Sterling, however, is completely oblivious to the danger. She leans over to her high-priced attorney, whispering and smickering, confident that her version of the truth, a version where Elena was clumsy and aggressive, will be the only one that matters. She assumes that because Elena is poor, she is also stupid and defenseless. But this is the fatal error of the entitled. They forget that when you have nothing left to lose, you become the most dangerous person in the room. Elena's voice, though small at first, carries a weight of truth that begins to shift the energy of the gallery. She describes the heat of the soup, the sting of the slurs, and the laughter of Mrs. Sterling's friends. You can see the shift in Judy's eyes, the transition from judge to executioner. We are currently standing at the edge of the cliff, and the fall is going to be spectacular. You are not just watching a video, You are watching the exact moment the universe decides to balance the scales. Stay right here because we are moving into the cross-examination where Mrs. Sterling makes the single biggest mistake of her life, and you won't believe the hidden item she tries to smuggle into the evidence pile that ends up being her own handcuffs. As the bailiff calls the court to order, the silence is so heavy you can almost hear the gears of destiny grinding into place. Judge Judy doesn't just sit down. She occupies the bench with the gravity of an apex predator that has already spotted the fatal flaw in the opponent's defense. She looks at Mrs. Sterling, who is busy adjusting a silk scarf as if she's preparing for a gala rather than a legal judgment. Mrs. Sterling's attorney, a man in a $3,000 pinstripe suit, offers a dismissive nod to Elena, a nod that says, "We're going to make this quick so we can go to lunch." But as Judy opens the file, the atmosphere shifts. She doesn't start with the plaintiff. She starts with the defendant. "Mrs. Sterling," Judy begins, her voice like a low-frequency hum that vibrates through the floorboards. "I've seen a lot of things in my 30 years on the bench. I've seen thieves, I've seen liars, and I've seen people who think they are above the law. But I rarely see someone who is so convinced of their own importance that they forget the basic rules of being a human being." Mrs. Sterling doesn't flinch. She leans into the microphone, her voice dripping with a polished, Ivy League condescension. "Your Honor, I think there has been a massive misunderstanding. I am a donor to the arts. I sit on the board of 3 hospitals. My husband is practically the reason the new stadium was built. I don't attack waitresses. I simply expect a level of service commensurate with the prices of the establishment. This girl was incompetent, rude, and frankly, I believe she has an agenda. She saw an opportunity to target a woman of my stature for a quick settlement, and she took it." She smiles then, a cold, practiced smile that suggests she expects Judy to be on her side. To Mrs. Sterling, Judge Judy is just another member of the elite class who should understand the burden of dealing with the help. But Judge Judy's expression remains unreadable, a mask of stone. "An agenda, you say?" Judy asks, tilting her head. "So, in your world, an agenda involves a 19-year-old girl inviting you to pour hot soup over her head in front of 60 witnesses? That's a very creative career path, wouldn't you say?" The gallery lets out a stifled laugh, and for the first time, a flicker of irritation crosses Mrs. Sterling's face. She begins to pivot, her tone sharpening. She claims that Elena tripped, and that the soup incident was an accident, a tragic byproduct of Elena's own clumsiness. She even goes as far as to suggest that the racial slurs were hallucinations, born out of Elena's desire to play the victim card. "It's the new trend, isn't it?" Mrs. Sterling sneers, looking toward the cameras. "To claim someone is a bigot the moment they ask for a fresh glass of water. It's a pathetic attempt at a shakedown. This is where the psychological warfare begins." Judge Judy turns her attention to Elena. "Miss, tell me exactly what happened when you approached the table with the replacement water." Elena takes a shaky breath, her voice cracking as she recounts the moment the verbal abuse turned into physical assault. She describes the way Mrs. Sterling's friends chuckled as the slurs became louder. She describes the feeling of the hot broth hitting her skin and the sheer, paralyzing shock of being treated like an animal in a room full of people who did nothing. But as Elena speaks, Mrs. Sterling starts making shushing noises, rolling her eyes and sighing loudly into her own microphone. It is a display of arrogance so profound it borders on the delusional. Mrs. Sterling thinks that by acting bored, she is showing power. In reality, she is showing Judge Judy exactly who she is. Judy stops Elena mid-sentence and turns back to the defendant. "Mr. Bird," Judy says, addressing her bailiff, "is it just me or does Mrs. Sterling seem to have a problem with her hearing? Because she's acting like this is a comedy show." Judy then looks directly at Mrs. Sterling's lawyer. "Counselor, I hope you've been paid in advance, because your client is currently performing a masterclass in how to lose a case in the first 10 minutes. The lawyer tries to intervene, suggesting that the emotional nature of the day is taxing for his client, but Judy isn't having it. She points a finger at the stack of documents provided by the defense. "You've submitted 3 character references from people who weren't even at the restaurant. You've submitted a medical report claiming your client has stress-induced memory gaps. But what you haven't submitted is a single shred of evidence that contradicts the 4 witness statements I have right here that say your client called this girl a subhuman servant before dousing her in soup." Mrs. Sterling snaps. Her composure breaks like cheap glass. "Those witnesses are nobodies. They're probably her friends. You can't take the word of people who drink $10 wine over mine. The room goes electric. The classism is finally out in the open, raw and ugly. Mrs. Sterling has just insulted the integrity of the court and everyone in it. But Judy just smiles, that terrifying thin-lipped smile. Oh, I'm not just taking their word, Mrs. Sterling. We're about to move into the evidence phase. And I think you're going to find that the nobodies in this world have a very loud voice when they're backed up by the truth. We are moving toward the moment where the hidden audio is introduced, and the look on Mrs. Sterling's face when she realizes her own security recorded her sins is something you cannot afford to miss. Stay tuned because the real destruction is just starting. Judge Judy's hand remains hovering over the file, her gaze fixed on Mrs. Sterling with the kind of intensity that makes the air feel thick and hard to breathe. The socialite is still huffing, her chest rising and falling beneath her silk blouse as she tries to regain the superior composure she's used to weaponizing in country clubs. But the game has changed. Judy isn't looking for an apology anymore. She's looking for a confession. You know, Mrs. Sterling, Judy says, her voice dropping to a dangerous, silky whisper. I've presided over 10,000 cases, and I've learned that people like you have one fatal flaw. You think privacy is something you can buy. You think that because you're behind closed doors, or in a high-end restaurant, your true face is hidden from the world. But we live in a digital age and the truth has a funny way of leaking out of the cracks in your armor. Mrs. Sterling's lawyer tries to object, claiming that any surreptitious recording is inadmissible under state wiretapping laws. He's sweating now, a dark patch forming on his expensive collar. He knows what's on that drive, and he knows it's a career killer. But Judy shuts him down before he can finish his sentence. Counselor, sit down. This wasn't a private conversation in a bedroom. This was a public outburst in a place of business where your client was screaming at the top of her lungs. There is zero expectation of privacy when you're standing on a chair calling a waitress a pestilence. And if you say one more word about wiretapping, I'm going to hold you in contempt for wasting my time. The lawyer sinks back into his chair, looking like a man who just watched his lifeboat catch fire. Judy turns to the court technician. Play the audio from the thermal microphone. Start at the 7:14 mark. As the speakers crackle to life, a hush falls over the room that is so absolute you could hear a pin drop on the carpet. At first, it's just the ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the low hum of jazz music. Then a sharp, piercing voice cuts through the air like a jagged blade. It's Mrs. Sterling. But it's not the polished, elegant woman standing in the courtroom. It's a monster. The recording captures her screeching, "How dare you speak to me? Do you even have papers to be in this country? Look at your skin, look at your clothes. You are a servant. You exist to serve me, and if I want my water at 34 degrees, you will stand there until it freezes or I'll have your manager throw you into the street where you belong." The audio continues and the sound of the soup hitting the floor, and Elena's muffled sob, is so clear it feels like it's happening in the room. You can hear Mrs. Sterling's friends laughing, one of them saying, "Careful, Beatrice, you'll get her filth on your shoes." The gallery is in shock. One woman in the back row covers her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Elena is looking down at the floor, her shoulders shaking as she's forced to relive the most humiliating moment of her life. But Mrs. Sterling? Her face has gone from pale to a deep, bruised purple. She's trapped and she knows it. The hidden secret wasn't just that she was recorded, it was that she had explicitly told her lawyers the recording didn't exist because she had personally dealt with the manager. She had tried to bribe the evidence away, not realizing the busboy had already sent the file to a cloud server. This is the moment where the untouchable finally realizes they can be touched. If your heart is pounding right now and you're waiting for the hammer to drop, do not look away. This is why we watch. This is why we fight for the underdogs. If you think Mrs. Sterling deserves to lose every penny of her inheritance for what you just heard, hit that like button right now to show your support for Elena. We need 10,000 likes on this video to send a message that racism and classism have no place in our society. Comment, erase hate below if you've heard enough. Judge Judy leans forward, her face just inches from the microphone. The recording is still playing in the background, the sound of Mrs. Sterling calling Elena a peasant, as Judy speaks. Do you hear that, Mrs. Sterling? That's the sound of your reputation evaporating. That's the sound of the donor to the arts revealing herself to be a common, low-life bully. You didn't just pour soup on this girl, You tried to pour your own insecurities and your own hatred on her to make yourself feel big. Judy slams her hand on the bench, the sound echoing the finality of a death knell. But in this courtroom you are the smallest person here. You are a gnat. And I am about to show you what happens when a gnat tries to take on the law. The cross-examination is over. The evidence is undeniable. We are heading into Section 4, where Judy doesn't just deliver a verdict. She delivers a sentence that will leave the Sterling family bankrupt and the entire internet cheering. Stay tuned because the real checkmate is about to be revealed. The digital recording finishes playing, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room that feels like the calm before a hurricane. Mrs. Sterling is no longer looking at Judge Judy. She is staring at the defense table, her fingers digging so hard into her leather handbag that the stitching begins to pop. She knows that the elite bubble she has lived in her entire life has just been punctured by a 19-year-old girl and a busboy with a USB drive. Judge Judy doesn't say a word for a full 60 seconds. She just watches Mrs. Sterling, letting the weight of the recorded slurs hang in the air like a poisonous gas. When Judy finally speaks, her voice is no longer a whisper, it is a gavel strike. Mr. Sterling, she says, leaning forward until she is inches from the bench's edge, you sat there and told me under oath that you were the victim of a shakedown. You told me that this young woman, who has worked 300 days without a break to support her family, was a liar. But the only liar I see in this room is the woman wearing 4 carats on her finger and a heart of pure coal. Mrs. Sterling tries to find her voice, her throat dry and clicking. It was a stressful night, Your Honor. The recording is out of context. I was having a medical episode, a lapse in judgment. A lapse in judgment is forgetting to turn off your blinker, madam. Judy roars, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. What we just heard was a window into your soul. You didn't just pour soup, you poured your contempt for humanity. You looked at a child, because that's what she is, she's barely 19, and you tried to erase her dignity because you thought no one was looking. But I'm looking. The world is looking. And I've got news for you, your medical episode is about to become a very expensive legal reality. Judy turns her attention back to the plaintiff's side, but she isn't looking at Elena anymore, she's looking at the evidence binder. I noticed something in your husband's financial disclosure, Mrs. Sterling. You claim here that you are the sole proprietor of Sterling Luxury Rentals. You also claim that you have no prior history of litigation. But my staff did a little digging during the lunch break. It turns out you've settled 4 similar accidents out of court in the last 3 years. 4 different servers for different clumsy incidents, and 4 non-disclosure agreements that you paid for with your husband's campaign funds. The room gasps. This is the nuclear reveal that turns a simple civil suit into a criminal catastrophe. Mrs. Sterling's lawyer looks like he's about to faint. He realizes that by lying about her litigation history on the stand, Mrs. Sterling hasn't just lost a $5,000 lawsuit. She has committed perjury in a way that is documented and undeniable. Judy's eyes are like laser beams as she continues. You've been using your wealth to silence the people you break. You thought you could treat the service industry like your personal punching bag and just write a check to make the pain go away. Well, the checkbook is closed today. I am awarding the plaintiff the maximum judgment of $5,000, but we aren't stopping there. Mrs. Sterling's smirk is gone, replaced by a look of sheer, primitive terror. She realizes that the hidden audio was just the beginning. Judy pulls a yellow slip of paper from under her desk. I am referring this entire file, including the audio and the evidence of your hushed settlements, to the State Attorney General's office. I believe there is a clear pattern of civil rights violations and potentially the misappropriation of campaign funds to cover up your personal assaults. And as for your husband's connections? Judy pauses, a cold, satisfied smile touching her lips. I've already had my clerk call the city council. I think they'll find the recording of their colleague's wife calling the taxpayers peasants very illuminating. Mrs. Sterling collapses back into her chair, the silk of her suit rustling like dead leaves. She came here to humiliate a waitress. She is leaving as the lead defendant in a racketeering and civil rights investigation. Elena is crying, but they aren't tears of shame anymore. They are tears of pure, unburdened relief. The power dynamic hasn't just shifted, it has been inverted. The nobodies have officially taken the crown. We are now entering the final section, where the ultimate sentence is passed and Mrs. Sterling's life as a socialite comes to a violent, public end. You do not want to miss the final 30 seconds of this trial, because what Judy says next is the most legendary shutdown in the history of the show. Stay with us, the finale is here. The gavel doesn't just fall, it sounds like a guillotine dropping on the neck of an empire. As Section 5 begins, the courtroom is no longer a place of mediation. It has become the site of a total social and financial execution. Mrs. Sterling is slumped in her chair, her expensive silk wrap now stained with the sweat of a woman who realizes she has just gambled her entire life and lost. Judge Judy leans back, her eyes cold and predatory as she prepares to deliver the final crushing blow. You know, Mrs. Sterling, Judy says, the microphone catching every icy syllable, the tragedy of people like you is that you think the world is made of two types of people. Those who matter and those who serve. You thought Elena was a ghost, a background character in the movie of your life. But today the ghost spoke back. And she spoke in a language you finally understand, the language of total loss. Judy turns to the cameras, her voice rising to a level of authority that commands the attention of millions. This court is awarding the plaintiff, Elena, the maximum judgment of $5,000 for property damage and emotional distress. But that is the smallest part of today's business. Because of the evidence uncovered here, the perjury, the systematic suppression of previous victims, and the blatant civil rights violations caught on that recording, I am issuing a formal order of protection that bars you from ever entering the Gilded Oak, or any of its subsidiary locations again. But more importantly, I am ordering that a copy of this entire proceeding, unedited and in full, be delivered to the Ethics Committee of the City Council. Your husband's career is built on the votes of the very peasants you mocked. Let's see how many of them want to keep a man in office whose wife thinks they are subhuman. At this moment, the hidden secret of the Sterling family's downfall reaches its peak. Mrs. Sterling's phone, which had been buzzing incessantly on the defense table, finally lights up with a news alert. The story has already leaked. The thermal audio has gone viral on social media, shared 300,000 times while the trial was still in progress. The untouchable socialite is now the most hated woman in the country. Her husband's political sponsors have already issued a statement of total disassociation. As Mrs. Sterling reads the headline, her face drains of all color, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of realization. She came here to crush a 19-year-old girl. She is leaving as a pariah whose name will be synonymous with bigotry for decades to come. Elena, standing at the plaintiff's desk, finally looks up. She isn't smirking. She isn't cheering. She simply looks at peace. The weight of the world, the shame of the soup, the fear of the Sterling name, it has all evaporated. She has done the impossible. She has held a mirror up to power and forced it to blink. If you are watching this right now and your blood is pumping with the thrill of seeing a bully finally hit a wall they couldn't climb over, then this is your moment too. This video is a testament to the fact that no matter how much money someone has, they can never buy the truth. If you want to stand with Elena and show the world that character is the only currency that matters, hit that subscribe button right now. We are building a community of people who believe in accountability, and we want you with us. Share this video with one person who needs to see that justice is real. Comment, "The truth wins," below to lock in this victory for the underdogs. Judge Judy stands up, her black robes billowing like a dark cloud. Mrs. Sterling, you are dismissed. And I suggest you sell that jewelry of yours quickly, because between the upcoming civil suits from your previous victims and the legal fees for the state attorney's investigation, you're going to need every cent. You thought you owned this town. It turns out, you don't even own your own reputation anymore. With one final, thunderous strike of the gavel, Judy exits the bench. The bailiff leads a weeping Mrs. Sterling out through a side door to avoid the swarm of reporters waiting at the front, while Elena is swarmed by witnesses and strangers offering her hugs and support. The aftermath of this trial changed the landscape of the city. The Sterling's real estate empire faced a massive boycott, leading to a bankruptcy filing within 6 months. Elena used her judgment money and the proceeds from a viral Justice for Elena fundraiser to not only finish nursing school but to open a nonprofit that provides legal advocacy for service industry workers facing harassment. The story of the thermal microphone and the socialite's fall became a landmark case study in how technology can level the playing field between the powerful and the powerless. Justice wasn't just served in room 302, it was broadcast to the world as a warning. The era of the untouchable bully is over. Thank you for watching this journey to the end. Your support makes these stories of accountability possible. We'll see you in the next courtroom. Court is adjourned.